Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving headfirst into a massive, kind of hidden force that connects everything from our history and global geopolitics right down to the digital screens in our living rooms. We're talking about complex, interconnected systems and how they produce these entirely unpredictable, invisible ripple effects. You know, we usually think of our actions, whether we're acting as entire nations or just individual people, as having a direct, controllable outcome. Hit A, get B, right? But as our world gets more and more interwoven, the chain reactions sparked by those actions are getting way harder to predict. And honestly, in a lot of cases, they're practically impossible to contain.
To really ground our exploration today, let's take a look at this profound observation from Winston Churchill, speaking to the British House of Commons back in 1948, which, remember, was just after the absolute most devastating conflict in human history. He echoed a timeless philosophical warning. Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. It's a heavy thought, but ignoring the patterns of the past basically invites future catastrophe. Because when we actually look at history, we see this clear, undeniable pattern of interconnected alliances leading to massive, unintended destruction.
So that brings us to the central question of our explainer today. If physical alliances and borders created such catastrophic ripple effects back in the 20th century, what in the world happens now in our highly interconnected digital age where these invisible ecosystems link global infrastructure and, surprisingly enough, our kids' virtual playgrounds? Are we doomed to repeat the past?
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The law of unintended consequences. 2. Echoes of past conflicts. 3. The cyber warfare ripple. 4. Blurring war and peace. 5. Exploiting virtual playgrounds. And finally, 6. The price of interconnection. All right, Section 1. The law of unintended consequences. Intent versus reality. This right here is the anchoring theory of our explainer. It's the idea that actions within complex systems rarely, if ever, stay confined to their original targets. Let's start on the left with intended strategic goals. A nation might form a global alliance to deter an enemy, or maybe a tech company launches a digital platform to foster creativity and play. The intent there is totally controlled and purposeful. But the reality? In complex systems, these actions spark uncontrollable systemic consequences. A local dispute suddenly pulls in the entire world. A digital tool built purely for efficiency spills over and causes civilian harm. Or a family-friendly game turns into a vector for exploitation. The intent and the reality are just fundamentally mismatched. Moving on to Section 2, Echoes of Past Conflicts, the macro level. I want you to think back to the buildup of those early 20th century conflicts. The geopolitical landscape in 1914 was basically a volatile witch's brew. We're talking extreme nationalism, unresolved territorial disputes, accelerating arms races, and this incredibly complex web of alliances. These components were tied so tightly together that a single, localized spark, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, didn't just stay a local tragedy in Sarajevo, it acted as a catalyst that quite literally blew the circuits across all of Europe. And what was the unintended systemic consequence of that one localized spark? An estimated 77 million people dead across World Wars I and II. To put that into perspective, it's a staggering, unimaginable loss of life. The leaders who kicked off these chains of events had absolutely no true realization of the horrific carnage, the ruination of entire societies, or the economic collapse they were unleashing. The system was just way too complex, and the ripple effects were far too vast to be contained by the people who initially set them in motion. Which brings us to Section 3, the cyber warfare ripple, the national level. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what we're talking about today. To really understand this, let's look at a fascinating case study from the Journal of Science, Innovation, and Creativity, focusing on the Iran-Israel cyber conflict. Now, cyber warfare is often praised for being super precise, totally covert, and relatively low cost. But academic research actually shows that, much like those tangled alliances of 1914, cyber tools operate in deeply interconnected networks where precision is, well, kind of an illusion. Just look at the timeline of this tit-for-tat escalation. Back in 2010, the Stuxnet malware was designed to very specifically disrupt Iranian nuclear facilities. It had a highly targeted intent, but the malware replicated. It proliferated globally, essentially opening Pandora's box for modern cyber weapons. By 2012, retaliatory attacks were spilling over into major regional economic targets like Saudi Aramco. And jumping ahead to 2020, we see attacks targeting purely civilian infrastructure, things like a major Iranian shipping port and Israeli water systems.
What started as a highly targeted strategic disruption completely spiraled into an uncontrollable cycle of retaliation.
Section 4. Blurring War and Peace, the Invisible Battlefield.
So academic findings break down these unintended impacts across three major sectors. First up, civilian infrastructure. Here, targeted military codes spill over, causing massive shipping delays and actually risking civilian health and water systems. Then, in economic networks, digital disruptions ripple outward to cause serious regional market instability and huge financial losses. And perhaps the most dangerous part of the whole shebang, we see a massive proliferation effect among non-state actors. This is where sophisticated digital weapons trickle down to hacker proxies, effectively democratizing the tools of war. It creates this murky gray zone where it becomes nearly impossible to distinguish between a military strike and just, peacetime disruption.
All right, Section 5, Exploiting Virtual Playgrounds, the micro level.
So far, we've looked at global alliances and national cyber grids. But what happens when these exact same principles of complex digital interconnectedness reach individual households? Well, in the second quarter of 2025, the user-generated gaming platform Roblox hit a staggering, record-breaking daily active user count of over 100 million people. That's 100 million! The sheer scale of this virtual ecosystem is absolutely massive. It's a completely digital world built entirely on user creation and social connection.
But as we zoom in on the demographics of this massive system, we see a highly vulnerable population navigating it. Around 40% of all Roblox players are under the age of 13. In fact, studies have shown that children primarily spend their time playing on this platform over literally all other activities when they're using a PC. They're navigating a deeply complex, interconnected digital world, and often they're doing it entirely unsupervised.
Now, what's really interesting to consider here is how this mirrors the exact same unintended consequences we saw in global cyber warfare, but translated directly into a child's virtual playground. The intended goal of Roblox was a safe, family-friendly creative space, but the unintended reality is that it has become a vector for severe exploitation. The platform has unfortunately seen grooming by organized exploitation groups like 764 and CVLT. It constantly struggles with the proliferation of unregulated condo sex games, which are often facilitated through third-party chat apps like Discord. There are widely documented instances of financial exploitation through microtransactions and loot boxes. And recently, the platform was even used to create simulations of political extremism and violence, like a recreation of the 2026 Tumblr Ridge shooting. And we have to be clear here, these are not just virtual problems. They have severe, real-world consequences. Since 2018, at least 30 people have been arrested in the United States on charges of abducting or sexually abusing children that they had groomed directly on the platform. Just as the Stuxnet virus bled out from strictly military servers into global networks, the dark behaviors festering in these virtual rooms absolutely bleed out into physical harm within our communities.
Let's wrap this up with Section 6, the price of interconnection, synthesizing the threads.
So the crucial point is this. We are constantly sold the promise of connection. We build alliances for security, we create digital networks for incredible efficiency, and we design gaming ecosystems for creative play. But we absolutely must reckon with the unintended reality of these complex systems. Alliances can trigger global war, digital efficiency opens the back door to infrastructure sabotage, and creative platforms can sadly become hunting grounds for predation. Whether the network is made of human diplomats, fiber optic cables, or gaming servers, the unpredictable ripple effects of complex systems remain a constant looming threat.
Which leaves us with this final, absolutely vital question to ponder. The clear-cut borders of the past are basically gone. The actions of a military hacker, a geopolitical leader, or a digital predator now ripple through the exact same interconnected web. So how can we build resilience in a world where war, peace, and play are no longer separated by physical borders? It's a massively complex challenge and one that requires us to look far, far beyond our original intentions. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today. Keep asking those big questions and always, always keep looking for the ripples.